Indian billionaire tears his Sherwani before an important meeting, but when he meets the seamstress, he is enchanted. Welcome to Billionaires and Hearts. Before we dive into today's emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to stay updated. We'd love to hear your first impressions, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think as you watch. And if you enjoy our stories, please like and share this video with your friends. Now let's get started. The sound of fabric ripping echoed through the lavish penthouse suite, followed by a curse that would have made even the most hardened Mumbai taxi driver blush. Mahir Kapoor, one of India's most influential business tycoons, stared in horror at the ornate royal blue Sherwani that now bore an unsightly tear along the right shoulder seam. "Not today of all days," Mahir muttered, examining the damage to the intricately embroidered garment. The Diwali gala at his five-star hotel chain was mere hours away, an event where he would announce the merger that would cement his place as the undisputed king of the hospitality industry in South Asia. Mahir's assistant, Vikram, appeared at the doorway, his normally composed face betraying concern. "Sir, is everything all right? The car will be ready in 40 minutes. "Does this look all right to you?" Mahir held up the torn Sherwani, his voice sharp with frustration. The gold embroidery caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the tear seem even more pronounced against the rich fabric. Vikram approached, examining the damage with a practiced eye. "I know someone who can fix this. There is a small shop in Colaba, not far from here. The lady who works there, she is a miracle worker with fabrics." "A miracle is exactly what I need right now," Mahir replied, checking his watch. The merger papers sat on his desk, awaiting his signature at the gala. Everything had to be perfect. "Get her here, now." "Sir, she doesn't make house calls. She is quite particular about her work." Mahir raised an eyebrow, unused to being denied anything in a city where his name opened every door. "Then I suppose we were going to her." To Indira Sharma, as nimble fingers danced over the crimson silk of a lehenga, adding the final touches to a bride's most treasured garment. The small shop, nestled between a chai stall and a mobile phone repair shop, was her sanctuary, a place where fabric spoke to her in ways people never could. The afternoon muezzin's call to prayer filtered through the open window, mixing with the perpetual honking of rickshaws and the chatter of passers-by. Indira barely noticed, lost in the meditation of her stitches. Her glasses slid down her nose as she hunched over her work, a single braid of midnight black hair falling over her shoulder. The bell above the door jingled, but she didn't look up. "Just a moment," she called, securing the last sequin with a practiced twist of her needle. "I'm afraid I don't have a moment." The deep voice, accustomed to command, made Indira finally raise her head. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Standing in her modest shop was a man whose face she had seen countless times on business magazines and television interviews. Mahir Kapoor, in the flesh, looked even more imposing than his photographs suggested, tall with shoulders that strained against his simple white kurta and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. But it was the magnificent Sherwani draped over his arm that truly caught her attention. "Mr. Kapoor," she said, recovering her composure, "what brings you to my humble shop?" Mahir stepped forward, laying the Sherwani on her workbench with surprising gentleness. "I need this repaired, immediately." Indira's fingers hovered over the torn seam, not quite touching the fabric yet. She recognized the craftsmanship immediately. This was the work of a master from Lucknow, hand-embroidered with real gold thread. Such a garment would cost more than she earned in several months. "This is exquisite work," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Can you fix it?" Mahir pressed, checking his watch again. Indira looked up at him, meeting his gaze fully for the first time. Her dark eyes, framed by long lashes, held a quiet confidence that made Mahir pause. "I can do more than fix it, Mr. Kapoor. I can make it better than it was before." She reached for her special box of threads, selecting one that matched the gold embroidery perfectly. "But I will need time. I have a gala in 3 hours. Then I have 2 hours and 45 minutes to work," she replied, with a small smile that transformed her face. Mahir found himself unable to look away. In this tiny shop, surrounded by fabrics of every color and texture, This woman spoke to him not as Mahir Kapoor, the billionaire, but simply as a customer with a torn garment. It was refreshing. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll wait." Vikram looked alarmed. "Sir, you have calls scheduled. Reschedule them." Mahir's tone brooked no argument. He settled into the only other chair in the shop, a worn wooden seat that had likely witnessed decades of customers. Indira raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She turned her full attention to the Sherwani, her fingers tracing the tier with a touch so light it seemed she was communicating with the fabric itself. As she worked, Mahir found himself studying her. She wore a simple cotton salwar kameez in a deep purple, adorned only with a thin gold border. No jewelry except for small gold studs in her ears and a thin chain around her neck that disappeared beneath her dupatta. Her beauty was understated but undeniable, the kind that revealed itself slowly like a jasmine flower opening at dusk. "You're staring, Mr. Kapoor," Indira said without looking up, her needle weaving in and out of the fabric with mesmerizing precision. "I'm observing," he corrected. "There's a difference." "And what do you observe?" The question caught him off guard. Few people in his world spoke to him with such directness. "I observe someone who seems completely at peace in their work," he answered truthfully. "It has a rare quality." Now it was Indira's turn to be surprised. She had expected a dismissive comment, or perhaps no response at all. She glanced up briefly, catching something in his expression that didn't align with the ruthless business magnate portrayed in the media. "Fabric doesn't lie, Mr. Kapoor. It doesn't pretend to be something it is not. Each thread has its purpose, its strength, its beauty." Her fingers continued their dance, nearly invisible in their speed and accuracy. "I find honesty comforting." Mahir leaned forward, intrigued. "Are you suggesting people are less honest than fabric, Ms. Sharma? Indira Sharma?" She tied off a knot with a practiced twist. "And yes, particularly people in your world, Mr. Kapoor. No offense intended." "Full offense taken," he replied, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. For a moment the only sound in the shop was the distant honking of horns and the gentle snipping of Indira's scissors as she trimmed excess thread. Outside, the afternoon light began to shift, casting a golden glow through the shop window. It illuminated Indira's face, revealing the concentration in her eyes and the slight furrow between her brows as she worked. It was this image that struck Mahir, her complete absorption in the task, the respect with which she handled his garment. In his world of corporate takeovers and billion-rupee deals, such genuine dedication was increasingly rare. "Tell me, Ms. Sharma," Mahir said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "How did you learn your craft?" Indira's hands stilled for just a moment. "My grandmother taught me. She made wedding clothes for the Rajput families back in Jaipur." A soft smile touched her lips. "She used to say that when you sew a wedding garment, you were stitching happiness into the fabric. Every bride and groom should have at least one day of perfect joy." "And do you believe that?" Mahir asked, genuinely curious. "I believe in the power of intention," she replied, resuming her work. "What we put into our work matters, whether it is a wedding lehenga or," she gestured to his Sherwani, "a garment for a business merger." Mahir sat back, surprised. "How did you know?" Indira's smile widened slightly. "The business channels have been speculating about your merger with the Oberoi hotel chain for weeks. And you were wearing your most impressive Sherwani on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't difficult to guess. You follow business news?" Mahir couldn't hide his surprise. "I follow all news, Mr. Kapoor. Just because I work with my hands doesn't mean I don't use my mind." There was no defensiveness in her tone, just simple fact. Mahir felt a prickle of shame at his assumption. "I apologize. I didn't mean to imply—" No offense taken," she interrupted, echoing his earlier response. The ghost of a smile played on her lips as she continued her meticulous work. As the minutes ticked by, Mahir found himself increasingly fascinated by this woman who seemed so completely at odds with the people who normally surrounded him. There was something about her, a quiet dignity, an independence of spirit, that drew him in. When she finally held up the Sherwani, the repair was nothing short of miraculous. The tear was not merely fixed, it was transformed. Indira had incorporated the repair into the existing embroidery pattern so seamlessly that it now appeared intentional, a flourish of design rather than a mended flaw. "This is—" Mahir stood, taking the garment from her with careful hands. "This is extraordinary work." "It is," Indira agreed without false modesty. "The tear actually allowed me to balance the design better. It was slightly asymmetrical before." Mahir examined the embroidery, noting how she had indeed improved upon the original design. "How much do I owe you?" Indira named a figure that was modest, even by normal standards, let alone for the rush job she had just performed. Mahir looked at her questioningly. "That is your regular price?" he asked. "That is my price for you," she replied simply. "I charge what S fare for the work done." Mahir reached for his wallet, extracting several times the amount she had quoted. When he tried to hand it to her, she shook her head. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Kapoor." "This isn't tea charity," he insisted. "This is the true value of your work. If I were to take this to any high-end boutique in Mumbai, they would charge me at least this much, and they wouldn't have done half as good a job." Their eyes met in silent negotiation. Finally, Indira accepted the payment, but only after adding a business card to his hand as well. "What is this?" he asked. "My terms for accepting your generous payment. Next time you need something repaired or created from scratch, you come to me directly. No assistance, just you." Mahir looked at the simple card with its elegant script. Indira Sharma, Master Seamstress, and a phone number. "Are you always this bold in your business negotiations, Ms. Sharma?" he asked, tucking the card into his pocket. "Only when I know the value of what I am offering," she replied, beginning to clear her workbench. As Mahir left the shop, carefully carrying his restored Sherwani, he found himself looking back at the small storefront. Through the window, he could see Indira already bent over her next project, her profile serene in the golden afternoon light. For a man accustomed to having the world at his fingertips, Mahir Kapoor felt something unusual, a desire to return to that small shop, not because he needed anything repaired, but simply to see the woman whose quiet confidence had, in the space of a few hours, stitched itself into his thoughts. The Diwali gala at the Grand Kapoor Palace Hotel was everything one would expect from Mumbai's elite social scene. Crystal chandeliers cast their glow over a ballroom, adorned with marigold garlands and floating dahlias. The air was perfumed with sandalwood and roses, and the melodious strains of a classical sitar trio floated above the chatter of India's wealthiest industrialists and celebrities. Mahir moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on the merger that would expand his luxury hotel empire across 5 more countries. Yet as he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, his mind kept drifting back to the small shop in Colaba and the woman whose deft fingers had saved more than just his Sherwani. "The embroidery on your Sherwani is exquisite," remarked Nandini Oberoi, his new business partner and heiress to the Oberoi hotel chain. "I don't recall seeing that particular design before." Mahir's hand unconsciously moved to the shoulder where Indira had worked her magic. "It is a recent enhancement," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reveal the full story. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around him, Mahir found himself stepping out onto the terrace. The Mumbai skyline glittered before him, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. Yet he found himself thinking of simpler things, the quiet concentration in Indira's eyes, the way her voice carried confidence without arrogance. "Escaping your own party." Vikram appeared beside him, offering a glass of Nimbu Pani. "Just getting some air," Mahir replied, accepting the drink. "The merger is complete, the press is singing your praises, and the Oberoi family is practically adopting you as one of their own," Vikram observed. "By all accounts, this is a perfect evening." "It is," Mahir agreed, though his tone lacked conviction. Vikram studied his employer carefully. "You know, I've never seen you quite so distracted." Mahir's gaze remained fixed on the city lights. "Tell me, Vikram, how long has that seamstress been working in Colaba?" Vikram's eyebrows shot up, but he quickly composed his features. "Ms. Sharma, as long as I can remember. Her shop was there when I was a boy. My mother used to take her wedding sari to be repaired there, though it was Indira's mother who ran the shop then. She is remarkably skilled, Mahir said, attempting to sound casual. Many say she was the best in Mumbai. Vikram hesitated before adding, though I am surprised you noticed, you don't usually pay attention to such details. Mahir turned to face his assistant. What do you mean? Vikram shifted uncomfortably. Just that you are typically focused on the bigger picture. Markets, acquisitions, expansion. Not the people who fix your clothes. The words stung more than Mahir expected. Was that how others saw him? As someone so consumed by business that he overlooked the artisans and workers whose skills made his luxurious lifestyle possible. Perhaps it is time I started paying more attention, Mahir said softly, reaching into his pocket where Indira's business card rested next to his platinum money clip. The weeks following the gala brought a whirlwind of activity as Mahir immersed himself in the details of integrating the Oberoi properties into the Kapoor Hotel brand. Days blurred into nights, filled with meetings, conference calls, and endless paperwork. Yet through it all, a simple business card remained in his wallet, untouched but not forgotten. One rainy afternoon, as Mumbai's streets transformed into glistening rivers, Mahir found himself directing his driver not toward his office or penthouse, but toward a familiar street in Colaba. "Sir, did you want to stop somewhere?" his driver asked as they passed the turning for the corporate headquarters. "Yes," Mahir replied, surprising himself with the decision. "Take me to Sharma Tailoring in Colaba Market." The rain had thinned the usual crowd of shoppers and tourists, leaving the narrow streets relatively quiet. As the car pulled up near the small shop, Mahir noticed that the lights were on inside, casting a warm glow against the grey day. He hesitated before stepping out, suddenly unsure of his purpose. He had no torn garments, no legitimate reason to seek out the seamstress, yet something compelled him forward, umbrella in hand, toward the shop that had occupied more of his thoughts than he cared to admit. The bell jingled as he entered, shaking raindrops from his umbrella. For a moment he thought the shop was empty. Then he saw her sitting by the window, the grey light illuminating her profile as she bent over a piece of midnight blue fabric. Indira looked up, surprise crossing her features before she composed herself. "Mr. Kapoor, has another wardrobe emergency brought you to my door?" Mahir closed his umbrella, buying himself a moment to formulate a response. "Actually, I came to commission something." She set aside her work, giving him her full attention. "What did you have in mind?" The question left him momentarily speechless. What had he been thinking? He glanced around the shop, eyes landing on a stunning bridal lehenga displayed on a mannequin, crimson silk with intricate gold embroidery that seemed to tell a story with every stitch. "That was beautiful," he said, nodding toward the display. "It is for a bride from Rajasthan," Indira explained, rising from her seat to approach the garment. "Her family has been coming to this shop for 3 generations. "You made this entirely by yourself?" Mahir asked, examining the thousands of tiny stitches that formed peacocks and lotus flowers across the fabric. "Every piece that leaves this shop passes through my hands," she confirmed, "though I have 2 apprentices who help with the simpler tasks." As if on cue, a young woman emerged from the back room, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of chai. She stopped short at the sight of Mahir, her eyes widening in recognition. "Priya, please place the tray on the table," Indira said gently, "and then you may take your lunch break." The girl nodded, setting down the tray before hurrying out, casting one last curious glance at Mahir. "She recognizes you," Indira observed, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Most people do." Mahir accepted the offered chair, watching as Indira poured the chai with practiced grace. "Fame is a strange thing," he said. "People recognize your face but know nothing of your heart." Indira handed him a cup, their fingers brushing momentarily. "And what would people learn if they knew your heart, Mr. Kapoor?" The directness of her question, delivered without pretense or flattery, reminded Mahir why he had been so intrigued by her. In his world of corporate politics, such honesty was as rare as the hand-embroidered fabrics that surrounded them. "They might be surprised," he admitted, sipping the perfectly spiced chai. "I am not entirely the ruthless businessman the papers make me out to be." "No?" Indira's eyes held a gentle challenge. You've built your empire by acquiring struggling hotels and transforming them into exclusive properties that only the wealthy can afford. The last hotel you saved in Old Delhi had been in the same family for generations. Mahir set down his cup, surprised at her knowledge of his business dealings. You've been reading about me. As I said before, I follow the news, she replied, unperturbed. And in this neighborhood we felt the effects when the Ahmed family lost their hotel. 3 of my clients worked there and lost their positions when you renovated. For the first time in years, Mahir felt defensive about his business practices. I create jobs, he said. The Kapoor Palace hotels employ thousands across India. Yes, but not the same people who worked there before, Indira pointed out. Not the old doorman who knew every regular guest by name, or the cook who had perfected biryani over 4 decades. Mahir fell silent, unable to refute her words. It was true that when he acquired properties, efficiency often meant replacing staff with new employees trained in the Kapoor standards of luxury service. I never considered it that way, he admitted finally. Indira's expression softened. Few in your position do. It is easy to see spreadsheets and profits, harder to see the lives affected by each decision. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows and creating a cocoon of intimacy within the small shop. For several moments they sat in silence, sipping their chai and listening to the rhythm of the monsoon. You still haven't told me what you came to commission, Indira said eventually, her voice gentle. Mahir met her gaze, finding no judgment there, only curiosity. To be honest, I didn't come with anything specific in mind. I suppose I wanted to see your work again, and perhaps the artist behind it. The confession hung in the air between them. In the corporate boardrooms where Mahir typically operated, such honesty would be considered a tactical error. Yet here, in this small shop fragrant with fabric and spiced chai, it felt right. A smile touched Indira's lips, transforming her serious face. Then perhaps I can suggest something. The annual Elephant Festival is coming up in Jaipur next month. My grandmother's family still lives there, and they always invite me to attend. The festival with the painted elephants? Mahir asked, familiar with the colorful celebration that drew tourists from around the world. Indira nodded. I go every year to create special garments for the mahouts, the elephant handlers. It is volunteer work, but it is my way of honoring tradition. She hesitated before continuing. If you are truly interested in seeing more of my work, perhaps you would consider commissioning traditional attire for yourself to wear at the festival. Mahir raised an eyebrow. Are you inviting me to accompany you to Jaipur, Ms. Sharma? I am inviting you to broaden your perspective, she replied carefully, to see a celebration that honors the relationship between humans and animals, tradition and modernity. Whether you choose to see it through my eyes is entirely up to you. The proposition was unexpected, yet Mahir found himself intrigued. When was the last time he had attended a cultural festival, not as a VIP guest or sponsor, but simply as an observer? When had he last witnessed an Indian tradition that wasn't a tea packaged and presented for wealthy tourists at one of his hotels? I would be honored to commission a garment for the festival, and he said, and to see Jaipur through the eyes of someone who truly appreciates its heritage. A genuine smile lit Indira's face, reaching her eyes and revealing a dimple in her right cheek that Mahir hadn't noticed before. Then we have a project, Mr. Kapoor. Mahir, he corrected gently. If we are to be festival companions, perhaps formality can be set aside. Mahir, she repeated, his name sounding different in her voice, simpler, more genuine. Then you must call me Indira. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, but inside Sharma tailoring, something new had begun to take shape, as intricate and carefully crafted as the finest embroidery, and potentially just as beautiful. The next few weeks saw Mahir returning to the small shop in Colaba with surprising regularity. His initial commission, a traditional Rajasthani angarka in deep blue silk with subtle gold embroidery, required multiple fittings, each of which became an opportunity for conversation that strayed far beyond fabric and fashion. During these visits, Mahir discovered that Indira was not only a master of her craft, but also a woman of surprising depth. She had studied literature at Delhi University, before returning to Mumbai to take over the family business after her mother's illness. She read poetry in Hindi, English and Urdu and could discuss everything from ancient textile traditions to contemporary politics with equal passion. For her part, Indira gradually saw beyond the billionaire persona to the man beneath. She learned that Mahir had built his empire from a single struggling hotel inherited from his father, that he secretly funded a school for underprivileged children in the neighborhood where he grew up, and that despite his wealth, he still missed his mother, his home-cooked aloo paratha, more than any delicacy served in his five-star establishments. Their worlds could not have been more different. Yet in the quiet sanctuary of her shop, they found common ground, a shared appreciation for craftsmanship, for things made with care and intention, for the stories woven into the fabric of Indian culture. As the day of departure for Jaipur approached, Mahir found himself looking forward to the trip with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business opportunities or networking. For once, his calendar had been cleared not for a corporate retreat or industry conference, but for something far simpler and potentially more fulfilling, experiencing one of India's most colorful traditions alongside a woman who had, stitch by stitch, begun to mend something in him he hadn't even realized was torn. The evening before their journey, Mahir arrived at the shop to collect his completed angarka. The garment, when Indira presented it, exceeded all expectations. The deep blue fabric seemed to shift in the light, while the embroidery, an intricate pattern of elephants and peacocks, told the story of the festival they would soon attend. "This is beyond what I imagined," Mahir said, running his fingers over the meticulous stitches. "How did you capture the essence of the festival so perfectly when I've yet to experience it?" Indira smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "I've attended since childhood. These patterns are as familiar to me as the lines on my palm." She hesitated before adding, "I'm glad you appreciate it. Some clients see only the surface beauty, not the meaning behind the designs." As Mahir carefully folded the garment into the waiting tissue paper, he noticed a small detail on the inner collar, a single elephant, no larger than his thumbnail, embroidered in silver thread. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the tiny design. Indira's cheeks colored slightly. "It's a signature of sorts. I place a hidden element in each special commission, something personal that connects the garment to its wearer." "And you chose an elephant for me?" Mahir asked, touched by the thoughtful detail. "The elephant symbolizes many things in our culture: strength, wisdom, removing obstacles," Indira explained. "But also memory. They never forget where they came from, no matter how far they travel." The symbolism was not lost on Mahir. In his rise to the pinnacle of Indian business, had he forgotten his origins? The lessons of his childhood, the values his parents had instilled in him. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions the small silver elephant had stirred in him. Indira seemed to understand what remained unsaid. "We leave early tomorrow," she reminded him gently. "The train to Jaipur departs at 6. "Train?" Mahir repeated, surprised. "I assumed we would fly. My jet is ready whenever—" "If you want to experience the festival as I know it," Indira interrupted with a soft smile, "then we travel as I always have. By train, then local transport. The journey is part of the experience, Mahir." For a man accustomed to private jets and chauffeur-driven luxury cars, the prospect of a long train journey might have seemed daunting. Yet Mahir found himself nodding in agreement, curious to see the world through Indira's eyes, even if it meant trading comfort for authenticity. "Then I shall meet you at the station," he said, tucking the carefully wrapped angarka under his arm. "And Indira, thank you, not just for this garment, but for the invitation to see beyond my usual world." As he turned to leave, their eyes met in a moment of silent understanding. Whatever lay ahead in Jaipur, both sensed that something significant had already begun to unfold, something as delicate and beautiful as the silver elephant hidden in the collar of his angarka, waiting to be discovered. Dawn broke over Mumbai as Mahir arrived at Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus, the historic railway station's Victorian architecture glowing golden in the early morning light. The usual bustle of commuters was already building, a symphony of voices, footsteps and train whistles, echoing beneath the vaulted ceilings. Dressed in simple kurta pajama, Rather than his usual tailored suits, Mahir drew fewer stares than he might have expected. He spotted Indira waiting by the platform, her crimson salwar kameez bright against the crowd, a small travel bag at her feet. She wore her hair in a long braid adorned with jasmine flowers, and Mahir felt a curious tightening in his chest at the sight of her. "You came," she said, genuine surprise in her voice when he approached. "Did you think I wouldn't tea?" Mahir asked, adjusting the strap of his own modest leather bag. "I thought perhaps your corporate responsibilities might present a last-minute emergency," she admitted with a smile, "or that the prospect of a 16-hour train journey might have prompted you to send your jet ahead after all." "I promise to experience the festival as you know it," Mahir replied. "That begins with the journey." Their train, the Jaipur Express, pulled into the station, and Mahir found himself following Indira onto a first-class compartment that, while comfortable, was a far cry from his private jet. They settled into window seats facing each other, the rhythmic clacking of the train S-wheels soon providing a soothing backdrop to their conversation. As the sprawling outskirts of Mumbai gave way to the varied landscapes of Maharashtra, Mahir found himself captivated not just by the passing scenery, but by Indira's perspective on it. She pointed out textile regions known for specific weaving techniques, told stories of artisan communities fighting to preserve traditional crafts, and shared memories of childhood train journeys with her grandmother. "She would quiz me on the different fabrics we saw people wearing," Indira recalled, her eyes bright with the memory. "By the time I was 10, I could identify most regional variations in sari draping styles and embroidery patterns." The hours passed with surprising ease. They shared a simple lunch of homemade paratha and sabzi that Indira had packed, supplemented by chai purchased from vendors at station stops. As day faded into evening, their conversation deepened, moving from shared interests to personal hopes and quiet confessions. "I never intended to become a hotelier," Mahir admitted, as twilight painted the passing countryside in shades of purple. "I wanted to be an architect, to create spaces that would inspire people. But when my father fell ill, the family business needed me." "And yet you found a way to design spaces after all," Indira observed. "Each of your hotels has a distinctive character that reflects its location." Mahir looked at her in surprise. "You've visited my hotels?" Indira shook her head. "I've seen them in magazines. The Kapoor Palace in Udaipur is particularly beautiful. How you incorporated the lakeside setting into the design without overwhelming the historic architecture." "That was my first solo project," Mahir said, touched that she had noticed the details he had labored over. "I spent weeks studying the original palace before beginning renovations." As night fell, the compartment was transformed by moonlight filtering through the windows. Most passengers had settled into sleep, but Mahir and Indira continued their quiet conversation, their voices dropping to whispers that seemed to create an intimate space in the midst of the crowded train. "Do you ever regret it?" Indira asked. "Choosing duty over passion?" Mahir considered the question seriously. "I used to," he admitted, "but I've come to see that passion can find its expression in unexpected places, and duty can evolve into something meaningful when approached with intention." Their eyes met in the dim light, and Mahir felt an understanding pass between them that transcended words. Both had shouldered family responsibilities, both had found ways to infuse passion into obligation, and both recognized in the other a kindred spirit, despite their vastly different circumstances. Jaipur welcomed them with a riot of color and sound. The Pink City was in full celebration mode for the Elephant Festival, its streets adorned with marigold garlands and vibrant banners. The air was fragrant with spices, flowers, and the indefinable energy of anticipation. Rather than staying at one of the luxury hotels where Mahir would normally be welcomed as a VIP guest, they followed Indira's tradition of staying with her grandmother's family in their ancestral Haveli in the old city. The 200-year-old residence, with its intricate stone latticework and frescoed walls, told the story of a once prosperous merchant family whose fortunes had diminished but whose dignity remained intact. Indira's relatives welcomed Mahir with warm hospitality that required no knowledge of his wealth or status. He was simply introduced as Indira's friend from Mumbai, and that seemed sufficient for the 3 generations gathered under one roof. They offered him sweet lassi upon arrival, showed him to a modest but comfortable guest room, and immediately made him feel part of their festival preparations. That evening, dressed in the blue angaka Indira had created for him, Mahir accompanied her family to the fairgrounds where the elephant festival would begin the next day. Artisans were putting final touches on decorations. Vendors were setting up stalls for food and crafts, and most impressively, the elephant keepers, the mahouts, were preparing their magnificent animals. "This is Sundar," Indira said, leading Mahir toward an elderly mahout, who stood beside an enormous elephant adorned with partially completed patterns in natural dyes. His family has been caring for royal elephants for 7 generations. The old man greeted Indira with obvious affection, before turning curious eyes toward Mahir. "This is your friend from the big city?" he asked in Hindi. "Yes, Chacha," Indira replied respectfully. "He has come to see the festival through new eyes." The mahout studied Mahir with a penetrating gaze, before breaking into a gap-toothed smile. "Good, good. Too many come to take pictures only. Better to come with open heart." He gestured toward his elephant. "You want to help? We prepare Lakshmi for tomorrow's blessing." Before Mahir could respond, he found himself being handed a brush and a bowl of red dye made from natural henna. Under Sundar's patient guidance and Indira's amused observation, Mahir spent the next hour helping to paint traditional patterns on the elephant's broad forehead. "Your hands are steady," the old mahout observed. "Good for detailed work." "My friend is a man of many talents," Indira replied, her eyes meeting Mahir's with quiet appreciation. Later, walking back to the Haveli under a star-filled sky, Mahir found himself more at peace than he had been in years. The simple joy of creating something beautiful with his hands, of being accepted without reference to his wealth or status, of seeing the world through Indira's compassionate perspective, all had awakened something long dormant within him. "Shall I thank you?" he said as they paused in the Haveli's courtyard, the scent of night-blooming jasmine surrounding them. "For what?" Indira asked, her face luminous in the moonlight. "For showing me what I've been missing," Mahir replied simply. "For reminding me that there is beauty in tradition, in craftsmanship, in connections that money can to buy." The moment between them stretched, filled with unspoken possibility. Then, from inside the house, Indira's young cousin called for her, breaking the spell. "Tomorrow is the main ceremony," Indira said, her voice soft. "It begins at sunrise." "I'll be ready," Mahir promised, watching as she disappeared into the house, taking with her some vital piece of his heart. The elephant festival unfolded in a pageantry of color, music, and ancient tradition. Mahir, guided by Indira, experienced it not as a tourist attraction, but as a living celebration deeply rooted in Rajasthani culture. They watched as elaborately decorated elephants processed through the streets, participated in the blessing ceremonies, and joined in traditional folk dances alongside locals and visitors alike. Throughout the day, Mahir noticed how seamlessly Indira moved between worlds, speaking respectfully with elderly artisans in one moment, skillfully negotiating with textile merchants in the next, and then patiently explaining centuries-old traditions to foreign tourists. Her adaptability and genuine respect for everyone she encountered, regardless of status, struck him as a rare quality in a world increasingly divided by wealth and privilege. As the festival reached its zenith in the afternoon, Mahir found himself separated from Indira in the crowds gathered for the elephant polo exhibition. He spotted her across the field, deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking older man whom Mahir recognized with a start as Vikram Rathore, one of India's most celebrated textile conservationists. When Indira eventually rejoined him, her eyes were bright with excitement. "Vikram ji has invited me to curate a special exhibition of endangered embroidery techniques at the National Crafts Museum in Delhi," she explained breathlessly. "It is an incredible opportunity to highlight the artisans I've been documenting." "That is wonderful news," Mahir said sincerely, taking her hands in his. "Your talent deserves such recognition." Her smile faltered slightly. "But it would mean postponing my return to Mumbai for several months." "The shop could perhaps be managed by your apprentices for a time," Mahir suggested. This opportunity seems too important to decline. Indira looked at him with surprise. You understand why this matters. It wasn't a question, but Mahir answered anyway. I do, because I've seen the world through your eyes these past days, and I recognize now what truly has value. As the sun began to set, painting the pink city in hues of gold and rose, they found themselves on a quiet terrace overlooking the festival grounds. The celebrations would continue into the night, but this moment of tranquility felt precious, a pause between what had been and what might yet be. What happens when we return to Mumbai? Indira asked, voicing the question that hung between them. You to your corporate towers, and me to my small shop? Mahir turned to her, his decision already made, though the words were only now finding form. I've been thinking about that, about the Ahmed family hotel that you mentioned, the one I acquired in Old Delhi. Indira tilted her head questioningly. I want to reopen it as it was, Mahir continued, with the original staff invited back, the traditional architecture restored rather than modernized, a place that honors its heritage while still being viable in today's market. Now that would be remarkable, Indira said cautiously. But why? Because you were right, Mahir admitted. I've been building an empire without considering the human cost. I've been chasing luxury at the expense of authenticity. I want to create a new model, one that preserves cultural heritage while creating sustainable livelihoods. His eyes met hers, unwavering. And I want to establish a foundation to support traditional crafts across India, starting with a proper workshop and training center for textile artisans in Mumbai. I can think of no one better to lead such an initiative than you. Indira's eyes widened. You're offering me a job? Mahir laughed softly. I am offering you a partnership. Your expertise and passion combined with my resources and business acumen. Together we could create something meaningful, something that honors tradition while embracing the future. A partnership, Indira repeated, the word laden with multiple meanings. In every sense you might wish, Mahir said softly, taking her hand. These past weeks have shown me that wealth without purpose is hollow, that luxury without meaning is empty. You have reminded me of the values I once held dear before success blinded me to what truly matters. Indira looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him, her eyes reflecting both caution and hope. Partnerships require equality, Mahir. Our worlds are very different. Are they? He questioned gently. We both inherited family businesses. We both value craftsmanship and excellence. We both seek to create beauty in the world, each in our own way. He squeezed her hand. The differences in our circumstances are circumstantial. What we share is fundamental. As twilight deepened around them, Indira made no immediate reply. Instead, she reached up to touch the collar of Mahir's Angaka, where the tiny silver elephant she had embroidered lay hidden. Do you remember what I told you this symbolizes? She asked. Memory, Mahir replied. Never forgetting where you came from, no matter how far you travel. Indira nodded, her fingers lingering on the embroidered elephant. I think perhaps it can also represent the journey ahead, one step at a time, steady and strong, creating new memories while honoring the old. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both recognized the rare and precious thing that had grown between them, a connection that transcended social barriers, that spoke to shared values and complementary visions. Like the finest silk embroidered with gold thread, their separate stories had begun to intertwine into something more beautiful than either could have created alone. So, Mahir said softly, shall we begin this journey together? Indira's answer came not in words but in a gesture as simple and profound as the first stitch that begins a masterpiece. She moved closer, closing the distance between them as naturally as thread follows needle, and in the glow of lanterns being lit across the ancient city, sealed their partnership with a kiss that promised a future neither had imagined when a torn Sherwani first brought them together. 1 year later, the doors of the Indira Sharma Institute for Traditional Textile Arts opened in Mumbai. Housed in a beautifully restored heritage building, the institute combined a world-class training center for aspiring artisans, a museum showcasing endangered embroidery techniques, and a collaborative workshop where master craftspeople passed their skills to the next generation. Indira's original shop remained open, though now managed primarily by her former apprentices who had become accomplished seamstresses in their own right. She divided her time between the institute, curation projects for museums across India, and personal commissions for clients who valued the artistry and intention she brought to every creation. Mahir, true to his word, had begun transforming his business approach. The Ahmed family S Hotel in Old Delhi had reopened under its original name, staffed by many of the same people who had worked there for decades, though now with improved conditions and fair wages. It became the first in a new heritage collection within the Kapoor Hotel Group, properties that celebrated authentic Indian hospitality while preserving architectural and cultural traditions. But perhaps the most beautiful transformation was the one least visible to the public eye, the deepening bond between Indira and Mahir themselves. Their partnership, begun in the unlikely setting of a small tailor shop, had blossomed into a relationship that drew strength from their differences rather than being hindered by them. In their private moments, they often marveled at the chain of circumstances that had brought them together. A torn Sherwani, a last-minute repair, a festival invitation that changed everything. "Do you believe in fate?" Mahir asked one evening as they sat in the peaceful courtyard of their newly shared home, a restored Haveli that blended traditional architecture with modern comforts. Indira considered the question, her nimble fingers working on an embroidery piece as she spoke. "I believe that life, like fabric, reveals its patterns over time. Each choice we make is like a stitch, seemingly small, but part of something larger that only becomes visible when we step back to see the whole." "And our pattern?" Mahir asked, reaching for her hand. Indira smiled, setting aside her embroidery to interlace her fingers with his. "Is still being created, one stitch at a time." In the gentle evening light, surrounded by the beauty they had built together, Mahir reflected on how a single tear had led to his most precious mending, not just of a garment, but of a life that, despite all its outer success, had been fraying at the seams. With Indira, he had found not only love but purpose, not only passion but meaning. And in that moment, Mahir Kapoor, once defined solely by his wealth and power, knew himself to be truly rich in ways that no fortune could measure, ways that, like the finest embroidery, would only become more beautiful with the passing of time. Thank you for watching this heart-stirring story. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of the story. Also, click on the video appearing on your screen to continue the journey with us. See you in the next story.